Behind the scenes of all this is Carla Dove, a forensic ornithologist and program manager of the Feather Identification Lab at the Smithsonian here in Washington. Welcome to Science Friday.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before everybody does it, let me ask you about...
Yes, that's my name.
You know, my mom gave me this age-inappropriate, non-OSHA certified chemistry set back in the day when you can have things that blow up, you know. Right. And I mixed these two chemicals together. I can't remember what it was, but, you know, I created this explosion. I burned her carpet. She ran in the room, and, you know, I got a spanking. But my brain was activated to science because I was a scientist at that point. And it was one of those moments where, you know, I became a chemistry major in college because of that one experiential moment in my life.
They have a siphon, which is kind of like a sniffer, a nose, right, so they can smell if there's prey in the water. If they think there's game to be had, then they'll let out their proboscis, which is like a tongue. On the tip of the tongue is a harpoon, which they'll then inject into the fish, and then they open their mouth, the rostrum, really wide and swallow and engulf the whole thing. So it's not dead, but it's paralyzed. It's going into what we call excitotic shock sometimes, and then it gets swallowed whole. It's like the worst death you could imagine. There's no escape.
Gosh.
It's much easier to find dinosaur bone than it is to find fossilized species. When you think about it, a dinosaur only died once, so it only produced one skeleton. On the other hand, it defecated a gazillion times during its lifetime, and yet, because of the difficulties of fossilizing the soft materials, it can be very rare, and it's also very difficult to recognize.
And I think what happens is that they try at different locations. Maybe one ant says, let's start something here, and he'll basically send out some pheromones and gather 2 ants, which will gather 4 ants, and eventually get a couple thousand. And they'll try to build on sort of the flat edges of the container, kind of like a wall. But the problem is there's just not enough places that they can get support. So they really sort of build, and it might get into something like 10 ants tall by literally the ants piling themselves on top of each other. But then the whole thing will just kind of flops over. So it's really just a process of trial and error until they find the right location.
I think one reason that many people have put off math is that they think they don't understand it. But none of us really understands it, honestly. We're just trying to understand it more all the time. And being confused doesn't mean that we're not good at it. I think a lot of people are put off because they feel confused and they go, oh, I'm no good at math. But actually being confused and caring about it is what matters. Often the people who think they understand it, they really don't.
I think probably science became a political issue when the discussion was, should we carry fire with us or not when we travel? I think that any time you have a group of people who are making decisions about how we use nature, that's a political decision. It's a human activity, politics, as is science. And so as we have gotten more complex, of course, the arguments get more complex.
How do we figure out how to have computers understand our human goals? This is incredibly important. If you take a future self-driving car and tell it to drive you to JFK as fast as possible, and you show up covered in vomit and chased by helicopters, and you say, no, that's not what I asked for. And the car replies, that's exactly what you asked for. Then you've really just illustrated why it is so hard to have computers understand what we really want.
There is so much that is unknown in this field. But I do believe that just as Craig Venter and David Cohen suggested that whereas the 20th century had been the century of physics with all of these fantastic breakthroughs and achievements, the 21st century was going to be the century of biology. And of course, they were talking about genomics. I think actually the 21st century is going to be the century of biology on Earth and beyond. I think there is a real opportunity in this coming century to discover life beyond Earth.